I think this is, if you really want to see what a bubble looks like, go to Beijing. That I think is where the really hot bubble is. But if you go a little south to Singapore, valuations are very reasonable. And here in the Silicon Valley, it's a little bit the best of times and the worst of times. I don't see that it's a bubble in any way, but I do see that some of these late stage companies are being valued way forward. But the early stage companies, we haven't had too much of a bubble. We pretty much value them the same way we have so I think the whole thing hasn't been swept up. And I talked to a lot of taxi drivers, and there are no day traders yet.
You see different taxi drivers?
So I will agree with Tim on part of his rule. I do agree that China is extremely overpriced right now. We are seeing PowerPoints get valued at $5 to $10 million. We're seeing product with no revenue get valued at $20 to $100 million in China. And I would say that there is likely a crash in China in the next 6 to 18 months, and I hope to be investing as soon as that finishes. Because I'm very long-term bullish on China, but not at the current prices. I think there is a bubble in Silicon Valley and the US in the public market. And I would say that if you think that late stage private market deals are overvalued or highly valued, I would say probably they are. Or you said forward multiple being priced in a lot, right? That's probably more accurate. I think that the companies haven't raised more money than they're worth. So different kind of public market valuation, as long as they clear the preference stack of money in and some leftover the founders are probably okay, but they're probably not all Uber. But I would say the general S&P 500 is overpriced. Probably most of those companies are baking in 10 to 20 PE valuation, PE multiples, and those companies are not going to be producing at 10 to 20 years at the current level of cash flow. And what I think is not priced into the market is the disruption that's going to happen among the S&P 500. So the Uberization of whatever, there's not really public taxi companies, let's say, but like pick any industry that's in the S&P 500, there is an equivalent internet company that looks like Uber or Airbnb that's about to kill them in the next 5 to 10 years. And because they're going to be killed in the next 5 to 10 years, you shouldn't be pricing those companies at multiples of more than 5 to 10 years, and they're being priced at multiples of 10 to 20 years. So that's, and this isn't being, there's no long-term short on the public market that's doable. So those companies are not having negative pressure on that pricing. So the only thing that the other people can do is put that money into the private market equivalents. And I think that's why you're seeing the long forward multiple or slightly higher valuation in the private market. But I would say the public market is at least as overvalued as the late stage private market.
Okay, I'm not sure that I agree with that.
Okay.
Because I think,
do you think that if more than 8% of the public companies
finish the sentence, let him finish the sentence.
If the choice is, do I invest in the public markets or do I put money into T-bills? T-bills have basically negative returns. People are looking for places to put their money. They put it in their mattress and then who knows what happens. But T-bills are so low, and the Fed has kept the interest rate so low for so long that those PE ratios have crept up. They have not gone anywhere near the equivalent.
But if you had $100, if you had $100 to put into late stage private companies worth more than $1 billion, or put it into public market companies, where do you put the predominance of that $100?
Well, I'd probably go for the private companies for a different reason. For the reason that Sarbanes-Oxley makes these companies pay an extra $4 million a year in regulation. So they're worth less when they're in the public market.
And their growth rates are much less.
And their growth rates are less, and they have less value because they have to hit quarter to quarter, whereas a private company can be more aggressive and can kind of grab a market. So it's kind of an interesting, it's interesting. And now I'm very interested to see what the Jobs Act does for all this, because if you can have, if everyone, all of us, instead of just millionaires and billionaires, can invest in private companies.
Sure.
Suddenly the market opens up in the private markets, and so you not only have better companies in the private market with less regulation, but you also have a liquid market. And if you have that liquidity, that's kind of exciting.
But I think the historical choice has been, put your money in stocks or bonds, and maybe alternative assets if you had access to them and knew what you're doing.
Yeah.
And now those same people are saying, okay, public market or late stage private market, I do my split there. And maybe in the future it will also be sort of early stage private companies. But I mean, you can sort of do that with AngelList now as long as you're accredited.
Right, as accredited. Well, now with the Jobs
That is
Act
changing now.
going,
Accredited.
now they're, I don't know how badly they are regulating this Jobs Act.
It's taken the SEC 3 years to
Right, I know, and
implement.
And it's possible that they've regulated it out of business, but if they haven't, we're all able to, anybody is able to invest in private companies, and that will bode well for AngelList.
And the rule is 10% of annual salary, maximum 10K. If you're not accredited, right? That's the proposal.
Yeah.
So the average person who might make $50,000 a year or $25,000 a year could put $2,500 or $5,000 into startups if they want.
Yeah, it'd be a good idea too. By the way, odds are better generally in the private markets than they are in the lottery.
Or in the housing, or in the housing market. Or in the housing market. Or did you mean the lottery when you said that? Did you mean the housing market or you said the lottery?
Well, I mean, in Vegas, they have those big buildings for a reason. They've made a lot of money off of all of us as we go into gamble, but this is, at least you're providing value to the long-term economy, and you are
job growth.
And in general, if you have a very diversified portfolio, in general, private investing will outperform.
Is
I
there?
find it interesting that like the U.S. government incentivizes home purchases.
See, it's happening
and
anyway.
leverage.
So you're going to the.
Okay, that was just one question. Let's get on to another subject. This will be
Okay.
fun.
Is there a formula for a successful investment, or is it what
For a
is it?
successful investment or fun?
Investment.
Okay, yeah.
Do you want to go after that?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, there is a formula for a successful investment, and once you think you have that formula for successful investment, the world changes. You no longer have the formula.
What's successful?
Okay, well, all I can tell you is what I do, okay? So
Or you can comment on what Dave does. That's
I
fine.
focus on the early stage venture business, and I believe that there is a bit of a formula there where if you go to Google and you look into the industry that somebody is looking to compete with, and if you see 300 different companies, then you are too late to participate in this business, or your odds are a little lower. If there are only 2 or 3 going after this industry, that's exciting, and if it's new technology, that's even more exciting. I look for industries that are getting big and lazy and bureaucratic. I look for industries.
All of them?
Well, a lot have gotten very competitive, but I look for industries. Well, the internet took on communications, information, entertainment, you name it. Lots of interesting businesses, and they really transformed them. But there have been some laggard industries that are so reluctant to change that they are just fighting it every step of the way. One of them is our own industry, finance or banking. That is ripe for the picking, and now that Bitcoin and the blockchain have come through, and e-shares, they're all potentially transforming this enormous trillion-dollar industry. I think that's going to be big. I think medicine is going to go through a renaissance because it's too expensive the way we operate, and it's not doing anybody any favors. So many people end up dying in the hospital of causes that they didn't go in there for. And our government spends a lot of time on everybody's healthcare. I think healthcare, things that systematize healthcare, like Theranos, with the blood tests, or the body bug that sends data on your blood pressure, whatever, up into the cloud. I think you combine those things and you combine them with all the data we have on disease, and we're going to have this big data thing that's going to be incredibly valuable to all of our health. We're going to really know some big changes are happening there. And then I think that governments, I mean, there's some good
There are governmental
Russians
officials
here, right?
here
Government-
too, from
so-
Ukraine and Georgia.
Okay, so I had the Prime Minister of Estonia, he came to speak at Draper University, and he said, just by implementing digital signatures and allowing those to be legal, we saved 2% of our GDP. And by implementing digital voting, our young people voted. And with digital identity, our crime rate's gone down. So all of a sudden, all these things are changing. Okay, so I tell that to the people that I know in Singapore and their government, and all of a sudden they're saying, okay, we're gonna do digital identity and digital signatures and digital voting. And I think that kind of thing is gonna spread throughout the world, and I think entrepreneurs are gonna do it, and I think that's gonna be another opportunity. So, what do you think?
I think Tim's been doing this a lot longer than I have and has had a lot more success. In fact, multiple generations of success, both before and after you. I think there seems to be a whole.
Well, there's genetic dilution.
My guardian children are in the audience.
I think Adam and Billy are doing fine, and Jesse's.
Oh yeah, well it popped back up in my generation.
So I was going to try and get at, what do we think success is? And I would say, at least for the venture industry, success is probably on an individual basis a 10x investment return or better, hopefully within 5 years, if not, maybe 10, but let's say 5. Or 20% net IRR. So that's kind of the target that I think most venture aims for. Our internal target for us is 30% IRR. That's what we're sort of aiming for. And I think there's no formula for success for an individual investment, at least not in my opinion. I would say, we're right, probably less than 1 out of 3 times, and maybe only 1 out of 10 times if we use the bar that I was just talking about.
Yeah, but if you were to pick one company of your investments.
If I were to pick one company, I can tell you about my unicorns. Those are 1 to 2% of portfolio, but Credit Karma and Twilio, and probably in the future, the Real and Sentiment, and maybe Viva Real in Brazil. But I would say, we, other people will call it spray and pray. We call it a quantitative and highly massively diverse portfolio, which is about 1,000 companies so far, and will probably be 500 companies.
Are you going to have to rename yourself?
Yes, we are. The new name
We're
is
now 1,200 startups.
No, the new name is going to be 500 VCs, actually. So strangely, I would agree with you. I think that finance has not been, finance is getting old and lazy and slow, and I think in particular venture has actually not been very innovative.
Yeah.
Tim's been one of the few exceptions to the rules. I think, DFJ has tried a bunch of different stuff. That's been pretty interesting. Probably Y Combinator, Google Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, first round.
Yeah, let's rank them all.
No, but I mean, that's it.
No, he's saying who has been
There's
innovative,
5 to 10.
who are trying new things, interesting new things that are changing our industry, and it's good.
Yeah.
And I think our industry needs changing. It was getting to be too clubby and stale, and always the exact same terms, and always and those terms got very complex. In raising Draper Associates, which is the fund that goes side by side with me, we've changed the whole nature of the terms so that we don't have all those weird things that come back to haunt you later.
Ratchets.
But you still have.
Clawbacks, ratchets, whatever. There are all those things where you make non-economic decisions that make no sense, but they make sense because of these weird terms. So it just feels better to have something.
What do you think will happen with the venture industry? Will it be less funds, smaller, bigger, angels?
Lots more funds of all sizes, but I would say lots more small funds.
Well,
That's already happening.
But age is close, what, 2.3 billion?
I mean, I think there's going to be a place for large mega funds at billions of dollars, and those will probably provide more late-stage private equity type of expansion, growth, and function. But I think the thing that has happened in the industry is actually the cost of building software businesses, at least in the first few years, has come down dramatically. The number of people who are customers and users all over the world has gone up dramatically. And the industry has not really changed. We're still doing $5 million, $10 million sort of investments as kind of the average.
What is an early stage now? What is a Series A?
Yeah, what is early stage?
You know, this has just got me thinking. This is interesting. I do feel that it doesn't cost much to get a company going.
In the first 2 years.
In the first 2 years. And so we look and we say, let's spread it out. Let's make sure that we get a good shot at a lot of different companies and maybe some will rise to the top. And then some of these other firms come in and they say, we just need to be big so that when we see one of these companies rising to the top, we're going to make them be the winner. So we're going to put $50 million in, and we're going to make sure that they beat out the other ones in this field. And I think those are the two places where real innovation is happening. In the other areas, I'm not seeing a lot of it.
How do you protect your early investment so that a bigger fund comes in and does not get, we don't need you anymore? You know, how do you
I
protect?
don't think we need to protect our early investments, just need to make sure that those companies are growing. Just because additional capital comes in doesn't mean our share is going to be worthless. It might be a lower percentage, but the aggregate value is probably increasing.
Oh, you know, you had some public Twitter correspondence with some of the CEOs.
You know, when I was an angel investor, I rarely followed on, and out of 13 investments, 3 were $100 million exits. Those 3 companies had Series A and Series B investment, and I was diluted on a percentage basis, but my outcomes were 10 to 20x. So I think it's a fallacy when people say as angel investors you need to protect your investment. If there's pay-to-play or down rounds, yes, but you're probably going to get washed out anyway in those scenarios.
What's interesting is in a down market, that's a much bigger issue.
Sure.
In an up market, nobody cares about getting diluted because they're just going, yeah, pay higher price, come on into our deal, make it all happen. In a down market, if you don't have the capacity to support your companies, no one else will. So you need to at least participate to bring other investors.
I think it's dependent on whether those companies are cash intensive or cash flow negative. Because some of my personal angel investments went through the 2008-2009 period fine, and they were revenue generating. Other ones did not.
Yeah.
So you're correct. It has.
You were lucky you missed 2002 to 2000.
I was here for that. I was here for that. I was an employee on that side.
We did really well internationally, but boy, domestically that was a really tough time.
And so that's a good point.
We had S1s dying on the vine because there was no public market. No one wanted to invest in any of these companies.
Do you think that will happen again? Do you think
actually,
2008?
you know what I think will happen is that we won't have S1s dying on the vine because I think there's going to be much more liquid private market. I think that's going to be much more valuable. So I'm hoping that creates the liquidity that we need. I mean, it was like the entrepreneur had been at it for 10 years. He needed to buy a house. He needed some liquidity. The venture capitalist had a 10-year fund that had gone through its 4-year extensions. They needed some liquidity. And it was a great company. But then when the S1s died, the company started to lose faith. And that was the end of, we lost about 5 great companies.
So I'm not worried that 2001 will happen again, at least not in the US. It might be happening in China. I am worried that 2008-9 might happen again. But the thing was, I think at the time everybody was thinking, Sequoia, RIP, good times. There's nobody going to be doing venture capital for 5 to 10 years. And a year and a half later, the markets were fine. In fact, people who invested during that time made a lot of money.
Well, 8 and 9, they came because of capital market issues.
In other parts,
not technology, Silicon Valley.
Right.
2001 was really a technology.
I think companies that were not really worthy of going public were being pushed public.
Right.
I think in 2008-9, you had a financial market dislocation in real estate that bled over into venture. But I think because of the reasons you were talking about before, these late-stage private actors that are displacing the IPO market, I don't think they're going to be as affected by markets locking up. They might still pull back on valuation.
Hey, are there a bunch of Russians in the audience?
Russians.
Russians, hands
Yes,
up.
there's a few.
Hands up, Russians. Okay. Do you?
What about former Russians?
Do you,
Essentially.
do you do anything in Russia?
We've done one investment in Russia. We would like to do more, but that's more challenging at the moment. We've done 3 in Estonia, several in Ukraine. We have invested in a company in Ukraine funded by us and Russians doing business in Moscow. How about that?
We have people from Ukraine too.
Yes.
With Russia, I am encouraging the brain drain.
Oh, really?
So I am encouraging it, and if you know
To
of a
where?
great,
Here?
you bet.
Okay.
If you know of a great Russian who is looking to start a business, they're in a very unstable environment now, and I think it would be great.
But isn't instability our friend? Isn't that when we want to invest in those markets? Isn't Russia underpriced right now?
I would be reticent to invest in Russia.
Okay.
I think I'd wait for the wave to go by.
Okay. What about a UK, US, or Cayman's entity operating in Russia?
You could have a piece of it operating, but getting to the markets and that kind of thing, you could have the technological piece operating there. I think it's just like, get out of rubles, get into Bitcoin, get to the.
Okay, but that's just it, right? What if you had a company operating in Bitcoin in Russia? You'd be like, that's
That'd be
great
okay.
arbitrage.
That'd be okay.
Great arbitrage, yeah.
People keep asking why so much is happening in China, including the investments. It's not exactly.
Why is so much happening in China? 1.4 billion people.
That's a big
India.
And a lot of them very high net worth.
And it started with, it started flat, meaning you didn't have to install landlines. You didn't have to create old infrastructure before you created a new infrastructure. Everybody jumped to a smartphone. And so there is a great future there. It's the same kind of thing. I remember hearing in old history classes that the British all felt those Americans were just good at manufacturing. No creative ideas would come out of that country.
They copy stuff really well.
Yeah, they copy really well, but no creative ideas would come out of that country. And I don't think that they were right. They were not right. And I think the same is true in China. So much creativity coming out of China now. They have that can-do attitude. They're not held back by regulation as much as we are here, or Russia is, or any part of Europe.
Although that has resulted in some environmental issues in China that are really challenging.
I'm not sure that is actually the reason. I think the environment will be improved as their economy improves. You'll see, I think you're going to see people driving more Teslas, and you're going to see people putting solar panels on their roof. A lot of that, the sun that you can't see there, is coal in the house, and old ratty cars that run on gas.
But I think there's a lot of folks who skirt the ostensible regulatory environment in China because of political connections, and so a lot of things are not enforced in China. And in addition to Beijing, now other tier 1 and tier 2 cities are just getting close to unlivable. Lots of people moving out of China, both Chinese and expats, now because of concerns.
Right, they're moving here because they're worried about their kids.
We have employees in Beijing that I worry about. I have a friend in Shanghai who left for Singapore because of kids growing up in those conditions, and I think there's going to have to be some change for them to address them.
I think that is right. I think we've got.
But I do agree with you. They are incredibly entrepreneurial and probably, I would say even better. Like Beijing is probably a more entrepreneurial environment than Silicon Valley right now.
In the finance area.
What?
In which sense?
More competition, more people going after it, more enthusiasm. I mean, some problems in valuation in other areas, but just in terms of raw density of entrepreneurship, like we don't hold a candle. Silicon Valley does not hold a candle to what's going on in Beijing right now. It's a factor of 3x or more.
And I'm talking about the finance world and how it's changing, and whether it's Bitcoin, smart contracts, whatever. It turns out that in China they don't have as sort of rough an SEC that's watching, like going after anybody
Yeah.
who's trying anything new.
In fact, the
And
SEC
in China-
here is bending its rules to accommodate China.
Yeah, but in China, they're going to revolutionize, I mean, probably revolutionize finance before we do.
Although I think the one Achilles heel of China is, as much as they've been exporters of products manufactured globally, they not really well suited, I think, to compete on software and language products internationally, at least not yet. I mean, they're learning English quickly, but there's still challenges for Chinese entrepreneurs acting outside of China.
Yeah,
at least
not just
outside of East Asia.
But finance ultimately becomes cross-border and not a big deal. So
I think there's no reason why they can't. I'm just
money.
saying.
It's just Bitcoin flying across.
Yeah, but I meant the soft skills in cultural and language.
Yeah.
I think they are going after that and catching up, and there's lots of Chinese who are educated in the U.S. and abroad. But I think right now, Americans probably have an easier time competing internationally via language, more just because English is a global language. We'll see where that
What
goes.
other parts of the world can you comment on in terms when it comes to creativity and emerging entrepreneurial classes other than China?
Go ahead.
Well, any and every geography, I think. I think there's lots of things that are happening in Southeast Asia and India. Probably the most interesting playing field going forward in the next 10 years is going to be Africa. And there, actually, China does have an advantage. Actually, China is thinking more forward about developing Africa in multiple layers, not just some pieces, but commodities, infrastructure, etc. Africa's probably the fastest growing set of economies around the world right now. I think the Middle East is interesting. I think Latin America is interesting. Southeast Asia certainly has been like blowing up in the last 2 or 3 years, not in that way, in a good way. But I mean, I think that like the arguments about creativity are just kind of tired. I mean, there are some cultural biases, but you know, I think there's more similarity than differences around the world. There's some formal societies where creativity is a little bit more stifled than others.
What about Europe? Will Europe do anything?
I think Europe's getting better, but I think the regulatory environment and sorry to say this, Europe is old. Europe is very old. It's getting older. With the exception of some countries where immigration policies are more flexible, maybe Germany and the UK, but like Italy and a lot of Southern Europe is getting incredibly old. The average age of the population is really getting higher. And there's not really being much done to change that. And it's not that negative overall, but I would say the fast-growing economies in the world are probably south of the equator in most cases. And I think the countries north of the equator, if they don't have open immigration policies, are going to get older a lot.
Tim, you see the same?
I'd pick, yeah, very much, but I'd pick a few specific countries to think hard about. Singapore is very interesting. Their population, get this, has grown from 3.5 million to 5.5 million in 2 years.
Because
And
of
that's
inflation.
because everybody wants to go to Singapore. It is a country where people are saying, wow, it's a good business environment, it's a healthy place, there's no crime, it's really a wonderful place. And they've done such a good job, and let's have a moment of silence for Lee Kuan Yew, one of the greatest men. That was the moment.
Some good things and some not so good.
Sure,
things.
but he turned a country that was dirt poor into a country that's richer than the U.S. on a per capita basis.
But some personal freedoms and liberties
Sure.
were sacrificed as a result
Yeah,
of that.
but I think all the people of Singapore would agree that that was a good benefit, a better benefit than drugs.
What do you want to
And
leave
then the
with
second country, I would say Estonia would be a very interesting place to go think about investing, because it comes from the top. If the guy at the top is a real innovator, winner, this guy's a winner. And so you look and you say, okay, they're gonna be much more dynamic. I'm a virtual resident of Estonia. All of you
No,
can
which
be
one, you were number
virtual
one and number two.
resident.
I think Steve is number one and you're number two.
No,
right?
Steve was 3 and I was 4. They gave 1 and 2 to somebody else. It was our idea. It was my idea. And then Steve's Estonian, so I said, Steve, you can go first. But you can be number 568 or whatever. I also have seen some extraordinary things happening in Brazil and Argentina, and even though one speaks
Argentina?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why Argentina. Even though it's an old population, the young people are saying, I've watched my fortune disappear 3 times in the last year. Yeah, so they're saying, hey, let's just create a Bitcoin economy, and they're doing it. And then in Brazil,
There's some pretty interesting parallels between Argentina and Russia, I think. A lot of talent, but a lot of challenges.
Yeah, real challenge. Brazil, I see so many entrepreneurs coming here from Brazil, and I'm not sure what that is all about, whether they want to go back or stay here. I'm just seeing a lot of activity, and I'm not sure what that is. And then Africa, you said it yourself. I think Africa has great opportunity, but some of those governments are really challenging. And if you have a government that just says, what's yours is mine, then there's no real incentive to build anything. But with an economy that grows sort of underneath all that, I think you have a really interesting opportunity to build wealth in Africa. The other part is that their infrastructure is nothing, and so that they can leapfrog even China in infrastructure. They can jump straight to
China's helping to build it.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
Now let's get a couple more questions and then we'll open for the audience because I'm sure they have questions too. So what will be the common mistakes entrepreneurs make? Doesn't matter where.
Well, it's a long list. The biggest one is usually just producing a product without customer feedback. That's sort of lean startup methodology, school of thought, generally speaking. But whether it's iterative or not, and whether it's MVP or not, I think talking to customers and using that as a feedback loop for product development and marketing. And it's sort of sad that that's still the same story. I'm sure that's been the same story for a long time. There's lots of really talented entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who produce great code and great product. Actually, I shouldn't say great product, great code. They are often not testing whether that code is useful or needed in a product, or whether that product is needed by the customer demographic, if they even have a customer demographic in mind.
I think a couple, not thinking big enough. Not going after a big enough industry is is often a challenge. And then being an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneur. So the idea of like, I'm an entrepreneur, so I need to go start a business. And then you start a business just because you saw that somebody had an interesting social media company. You're going to start a social media company. That's death to an entrepreneur, or death to someone who really thought they were an entrepreneur. I also think sometimes they can sell themselves into an idea with a partner so that they're both so excited about it for a while, but they don't have that long staying power that it takes to be a great entrepreneur. They gotta, like for instance, if 2 people are dating and they decide that they're all excited about their new business, but really they're just excited about each other. And they go out and then they start this business and they realize that this just isn't great, or they realize that the guy or the girl is not so great, and then they split up and the business fails. So I think it's big enough market, and then is it unique? Is it special enough? Are there 300 companies like it, or are there 3 companies like it? If there are none, you have to be kind of aware, like, whoa, no one else on this entire earth is doing this? That makes you wonder a little bit. But if there are 3, you know you're kind of onto something. If there are 100, that And maybe you say, well, no, nobody's doing it just this way. That's not enough. It can't be just that like narrow chain. But there are some really extraordinary entrepreneurs who start with a little business that seems kind of narrow at the time and seems like it doesn't quite have anything, but then they just keep iterating and they keep getting better and they keep getting better, and then suddenly they've got something that really takes off.
What if there's 300 in China and 300 in the US, but there's 3 in Brazil?
Well, if you can build a big enough market in that marketplace, then that's okay. But I actually think they're all going global. I think that distribution is a commodity now. When you go and try to
I see
get
a lot of Chinese or US entrepreneurs going to Brazil.
they get there.
I think there's 200 million people in Brazil, and it's a really damn big market, but I don't see very many competitors.
But what about this? If you've come up with some new technology and it doesn't require a language,
Sure,
it will pass through those borders and it will spread around the world as fast as anything there is. I mean,
Pinterest can go global easier than Airbnb or Uber, but I think Travis is having an uphill battle in China, and I think he's having an uphill battle in some other places. I don't think Airbnb just walks into Brazil. So I mean, I do think that there are plenty of geographies of 100 million to 500 million people that most U.S. entrepreneurs overlook, and at least for the moment, a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs aren't looking at either.
Oh, that's true. I have an investment in Safer Taxi, which is taking a lot of South America for the Uber world.
I mean, I think Tim, probably clearly outlined the, if there's 3 companies, interesting. If there's 300, it's not. But I think there's a lot of geographies where there's only 3 companies doing a business where in other countries, there's been lots of
stuff. If it's a
stuff.
big enough business, that's perfect.
And I think the surprising places where those things are happening now is Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran.
We have a company from
Brazil.
Nigeria here.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's $100 billion businesses in Nigeria right now, which are going to be $1 billion businesses in another few years. So there's probably even a couple of $1 billion businesses in Nigeria. They just haven't been financed yet.
Now, what about accelerators? Do entrepreneurs?
Oh, those are a waste of time.
Don't they sometimes call you guys an expert?
Oh yeah, right. Sorry. Well, I don't know. Was Bill Gross crazy or not? Is Bill Gross
Oh, I
crazy?
think he's so great.
I think he's brilliant.
I think he's so great. I think in that, now, it depends on how you define it. That's why we're having problems.
Sure.
Right, let's define
Because,
it.
okay, Bill Gross he called himself an incubator, and he was the one brain, and he had a whole beehive around him working. And he'd come up with a new business, and then he'd hire people from Caltech. But many of the incubators or accelerators are like 500 startups or plug and play or whatever, where you reach for people from all over the world. You try to create a system, and then you can operate that system and then filter them down to the best and the brightest. I think it's a very important part of our ecosystem. Now, my son started Boost. Then he turned and he started to focus it first on Bitcoin. Now it's going to be, the next time it'll be VR. He may do something else. But some of these folks, his incubator or accelerator, he's calling it accelerator, is 24/7. They live there and they work there and they come up with ideas together, and they're constantly, fighting about coming up with more.
I get to see, I actually hear a lot about them. They're a lot of fun.
And then YC it's not a lot of, it is good service for the entrepreneur, but they've made it very simple. It's really, you get into YC, you work on a presentation, and you come to demo day, and that is an interesting model, and that has worked out very well for them, and will continue to.
I think Bill Gross, at least initially in kind of the late 90s, was one of the originators of a lot of the ideas. And Paul Graham, probably 2005-06, was kind of the second big innovation or change around a lot of that. But But I would say that I think there's a lot more competition now. I mean, there's a lot of shitty accelerators, a lot of okay accelerators, there's a few good ones. Hopefully we're one of those. But I think, as Tim suggests, there's starting to be an established place for accelerators in the overall ecosystem, just like there is for seed funds and later stage funds and others. But I think there's going to be a lot of different value-added services that are introduced and a lot of variation around different vertical focus. So I think there's not going to be as many generic focus accelerators. There probably will be more SaaS accelerator, e-commerce accelerator, education accelerator, et cetera, in a bunch of different geographies. We've started to focus a lot more on customer acquisition, growth hacking, or marketing, whatever you want to call that, as a big kind of area of specialization. For us, we're generally taking companies that do have functional product and are already early customer usage or revenue, so we're not going after ideas and trying to take concept to product. There are plenty of other accelerators that do focus on those stages.
You know, and the plug for Draper University, they're sort of a pre-accelerator.
Right. There you go.
So why don't you tell people a little bit about Draper University?
So Draper University is a 6-week program for people, I see a few students here, for people 18 to 28 years old, and they come from all over the world, they live there, and then we take them through a process that at the time seems a little crazy, but it builds a really tight network of people, and they get a chance to hear from about 50 great, in fact, Dave's been a great speaker there. And then at the end, they actually have a demo day and in front of a panel of venture capitalists. And there's a little piece that's, we may have to rename because we want more women to come, but there's survival training. We do some very interesting
I'll give them an example. What would you do to a person?
Okay, so survival training, there's both urban and rural. The urban survival training is, we say, okay, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, you got to get up to San Francisco and get a job offer on paper and come.
What's the time frame?
They're from 2 in the afternoon to 7 the next morning. So some of them get jobs sweeping gay bars and some jobs at Twitter. And then another thing they do is the rural survival training we have with some guys from Special Forces and Navy SEALs and Rangers, and they come together and we change it every time, but we challenge you physically, emotionally, mentally, as hard as we possibly can, because we know to be an entrepreneur, you have to put up with so much. And so we felt like having something that is that physical and that emotional gets these people to see what they are capable of and how much further they can go, even though they think they can never go any further. So
It's probably have the women do that stuff, and they shut the guys, try to make sure they get 2 kids woken up, fed, and get to school up.
Yeah, that's what I was. Women don't need that training, you know. Life trains women first. Well, you get to do the commercial too, just to be fair.
I thought I've been doing commercials.
Good.
About 500.
All right, we can open questions. I'm sure we've got a lot of questions. Well, the mics are getting to you. Okay, Ilya, you got to go back first.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for exciting talk. Tim, I have a question for you. When you were speaking about the next big thing, you said like government applications and public sector can be one of those, and I totally agree with you. But my question is, why so far we didn't see a single, like a major, like a really killer app in that area? And moreover, when Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are coming to government, they are actually using the same technologies as Abe Lincoln type, rather than modern things. Meg Whitman, Carly Fiorina, recently Rohan, you yourself, when you were doing the California thing,
Right,
the
6
referendum,
California.
used the same old technologies. There is not a single app which came from that. Why is that?
Because the way the government has operated for so many years, they don't change. In fact, I got to tell you, government is us, so we should change. Interesting. I'll just tell you a quick thing about the 6 Californias. I thought, okay, this is great. I need 1,000,004 signatures. Let's go get them. So I thought, okay, I'll just do a blast email. People will do digital signatures on DocuSign. No. You go and these all have to be handwritten and affixed to a piece of paper. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll send out emails, and then they'll send back, they'll print it out and send their signatures and send it in. No. It has to be on a 14 by 17 sheet of paper with a certain font that is only available from 3 printers in Sacramento. So you multiply that by 1,000,000 different issues, and you see that getting something changed from outside government or from inside government is very difficult. Arnold Schwarzenegger, most popular man on the earth when he became governor, was not able to get anything through that government, any very difficult thing through that government. He'd argue that there were a few things he did change, but the 4 things he really wanted to do didn't happen. Our government doesn't change very easily, but if something like this Estonian government comes along and says, digital signatures, all of a sudden, and we save 2% of our GDP, there will be public outcry. People say, we need digital signatures. And then suddenly, DocuSign capitalizes it or somebody else. So I actually think that, government has resisted this long enough, and it's interesting, you see the bankers going like this, side by side, to defend against Bitcoin. You see the same thing with the government going side by side to defend against anything that might change their happy little environment.
All right, let's go to another question. Yeah, Lorraine.
Said potential formula for success. What do you think about Google or even Facebook in light of that? Because there's a lot of raves in the search and even in the social media area before they came along.
So Google and Facebook, did you say? Yeah, okay. So it's true, Google was the 26th search engine. And it was a bit of a copycat. It copied Overture on the paid search, and it copied Direct Hit on how it did its work. That was a situation where it was a little like what some of our big venture capitalists are doing now. They saw something that they had missed, and they had a lot of money, and they went, this is the one. And they took the market away. And I was surprised that it happened so fast. Now, that's pretty much ancient history. Things happen much faster, competitive things happen much faster than they did back then. Facebook, there were arguably, there were a few that didn't have it right. So you could have something where you really get it right. There was a friend finder, and there was something. MySpace actually had that market. They won. And then Facebook figured out that there was this exclusivity that people wanted to fight to get into, and that kind of grew. And then all of a sudden they opened up Facebook, and it grew much, much bigger than MySpace missed their calling. And I think there were some management issues at MySpace at that time where they were a little bit confused as to who's running it. So there are opportunities to come in and grab a market, but I'd argue that it was really just Facebook and MySpace at that time. The other ones didn't really have the right model, so you had 2. And when Google came in, that was a unique time where you could come in and grab it, do it right, brand it. I was sort of surprised that Yahoo didn't win that.
Dave, do you want to comment on it?
Just continued innovation and disruption is always going to happen, and Facebook has been under threat from Snapchat, from Instagram, which they purchased, and WhatsApp, which they've purchased. Evan Spiegel has decided trying it solo, and it seems like so far he's been doing fine. So we'll see. Under 21 youth usage of Facebook has probably been stable or dwindling, and Snapchat's been growing substantially. So I think it's unclear right now. Facebook's done a pretty good job with acquiring other messenger platforms and building out itself. But there's clearly some threat to Facebook from Snapchat and probably from other services that are coming out as well. So there's always disruption and innovation.
Yeah, and small tweaks may make a huge difference. I mean, there were a bunch of iPods out there, iPod-like devices out there when Steve Jobs said, one button, it's got to fit in my hand like a deck of cards. One button, got to fit in my hands like a deck of cards. And he just kept pounding on the engineers to get that. That first iPod had about 1/4 the price performance of some of its competitors, but it looked good, and it was only one button, and it was simple. I actually would argue that now, no buttons. It should anticipate your needs. If you can figure out how to get rid of buttons, totally get rid of buttons,
You'll just look at it?
and anticipate what you need ahead of time, you've got a business.
I think that sometimes there's a little bit of over fascination with big stories and unicorns in Silicon Valley, and that we miss a lot of the smaller stories that are happening. I think in the last 5 years in particular, there's been a renaissance in the ability for small stories to flourish without very much capital. And I think for a lot of folks in the venture capital chair, that's not really aligned with our interests, and so we tend to maybe belittle those stories. And you know, not to say that there aren't great entrepreneurs out there and that is going to be a continuing focus. But I think the really interesting story for me is the fact that there's a lot of people who can create $10 million businesses and $50 million businesses with an extremely small amount of capital, who probably don't even need venture capital, and that's a global story. And that's a very recent thing that has occurred. These large platforms like Facebook and Google and Pinterest and YouTube and Apple and Android are interesting not just because of the entrepreneurs and the businesses that have built them, but because they are platforms for millions of other smaller entrepreneurs to ride on top of, and that unleashes an incredible amount of economic potential and job growth. And I think if you look at the overall economy, you know, more than 50% of the U.S. economy and GDP is fueled by non-public businesses, probably 20% by businesses under 100. Globally and internationally, it's probably 50% of the global economy that's powered by very small businesses with less than 25 employees. Those businesses have historically been starved for capital, both debt and equity, and that's going to change.
And you are changing how you're doing stuff?
I hope that we have some impact on that. I mean, if I'm ambitious enough to say that we might actually have 500 VCs, we'll have a small dent on that. If we're 50,000 VCs, we might have a much bigger dent on that.
We have a question here, Mel.
Great chat.
Val?
I've been many panels listening to both of you, so
We have really big mouths.
always get new ideas and makes me think back. Two real quick questions. The easiest is for Dave. So you mentioned a few successful companies, Twilio in 500. Why you didn't mention Realty Mobile, Julian? Realty Mobile, Julian.
Realty Mobile.
Realty.
Am I an investor in that company?
I'm investing. I don't know if you, I don't know, I do 500.
Sorry, I do forget some, and I probably only know
Yeah,
what
she's in Santa Monica doing kind of innovation in financial realty model. Julian, if you don't remember, it's okay. Anyway, so the other question is for Tim and.
Your question was easier than.
I'm not sure that's a company in our portfolio. Are you saying it is?
She was part of 500 startup. I invested on a demo day.
They just put
What was
their
the name
brand
of
on
the
the website.
Realty Mobile.
Realty Mobile.
Okay. I have to check. There's 20 people on the team. I might have forgotten.
It's fine.
I
So the second question is for Tim, and I'm
not in Realty Mobile.
no one. But you're in Estonia, okay? So the question is about obviously you have sentiment for Estonian software. You've done well with Skype. So when you say invest in Estonia, do you calculate a geopolitical risk that investment this country might have.
Well, there's a really aggressive country nearby with tanks in another country.
Right. More questions?
Yeah, we look at everything. Anytime we're looking at a new country.
So unless the name changed, I'm pretty sure we're not investors in the company. You can correct me afterwards if I'm wrong.
Okay, we have time for one more question. If not, then what would you recommend to people who do want to start a company and they don't live in Silicon Valley and they don't have professional investors really? Like, what do they do? They cannot all
I
come
think
here.
it's got to be bursting out of their heart. I think if you're starting a business, it should be something where you know there's a problem and you know you have a solution to it, or you think that by identifying the problem, engineers will fly to your door and work for free to make sure that that happens. I mean, that's sort of when Elon Musk says we're going to Mars, about 10%, 90% of the population chuckle like that, and 10% think, how would we get to Mars? And then they all become free engineers for him, and he builds it, and on the way to Mars, all these other things happen. Great new technologies happen, good ideas happen, new markets pop up, so interesting things happen. So have that as the idea that I'm going to put my stake in the ground. 90% of the people will laugh at me, 10% will join me. You have that. If you have that, you've got a business. And if it's something that you just have to have happen. I use the word passionate, but I've stopped using it because people come to my office and say, this is my business and I'm really passionate about it.
Okay, let's be passionate. Let's change the world. Thank you guys